Hello, we are live. So let me know in the comments if you can hear me. If the audio is sounding good, let me know, folks. Tell me what you think. So I'll be waiting right here for you. Let's see what we got. All right. So waiting for some chats. Waiting for someone to chime in and say, DL, we can totally hear you, or no DL, you got to move it up closer and be weird like you were yesterday. So let me know in the chats, folks. We'll see what we've got. All right, but we are definitely live. We are streaming. So if you're watching this right now and you're like, what the heck is going on? Why is it green in the background? That is because if you're tuning in and this is the first time you've seen the show, or you're used to seeing a different look in the show, what's going on is that my laptop is down and I have parts on order to fix it, but the show must go on. And so I am streaming from my phone with, that's like literally the only device that I have going on with the stream. So, and then I do have my microphone here so I can at least record the audio for like the podcast crowd, you know, Spotify, iTunes, etc. And they can at least get some good audio. But if you're watching the stream, we're just gonna have to deal with what we can. I was not able to successfully get any of the microphones that I have working with the Rumble Studio app and my phone. For some reason, it just wasn't working, so I was like, whatever. So that's what it is. That's where we are. I am getting some feedback that everybody can hear me. I think yesterday the issues with the audio going in. Oops, sorry about that, folks. The audio is going in and out. That was just a setting that tries to cancel noise if you have a guest on, and that way there's no weird feedback or anything. So that's why the audio was going in and out yesterday. So I've resolved that. So we're good there. So all right. So you've got my update. We're good to go. And let's talk about masculinity today. So I want to tell you about two stories. One came across from my wife yesterday. She actually sent me something, and it was a story about a somewhat local teenager, an 18-year-old, who was shot by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement here, FDLE. So I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to take that story and I'm going to merge it with something I heard on Dave Smith's Part of the Problem podcast, his episode, which was titled Constitutional Crisis. So I'm going to take those two things, I'm going to tell you about them, and then I'm going to merge them together and tell you about masculinity. And I think it's going to work. We're going to try it. I like the idea of just taking what seems to be two unrelated stories, merging them together, and then seeing what we can learn from that. So the first story, and I'm going to read here. I've got my very, very old tablet here so that I can at least read the news story. So this comes from jackstoday.org, titled FDLE Officer Shoots Teen as he plays, quote, senior assassin. And you're like, well, what is senior assassin? We'll get to that. So here's the story. An off-duty officer of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement shot an 18-year-old student in the arm Wednesday as he played a game of senior assassin in Nassau County with a water gun. So you're like, wait, what? An officer shot a kid with a water gun? We should be outraged, right? Well, maybe. The shooting happened just before 6 a.m. on Purple Martin Lane in Yulee. Okay, so now we have an 18-year-old with a water gun at 6 a.m. in the morning. The FDLE agent saw what appeared to be 3 people prowling outside his house in the dark, Nassau County Sheriff Bill Leeper said. The blue water gun looked like the real thing, Leeper said. One of the 3 students was from Yulee. The student who was shot is from Bishop Kenny High School in Jacksonville. These are basically, there's a good distance. It's like an hour drive or something like that. It's a good distance from each other. Maybe not an hour, maybe like 30 minutes. The student who was shot is from Bishop Kenny High School in Jacksonville. He was taken to UF Health with injuries that were not life-threatening. So that's a positive in this story. While intended as a harmless senior tradition, the game has drawn serious safety concerns from law enforcement officials, Leeper said. These type of games may seem innocent, but when you have young people sneaking around in the dark wearing masks, and carrying objects that could be mistaken for weapons, you're creating a potentially deadly situation. The incident demonstrates exactly why parents need to take this seriously and speak to the kids about the dangers of these types of games. Leeper added, the next time this happens, it could be someone's life. The sheriff's office did not release the names of the students or the FDLE officer. More information will be released when it is available, the sheriff's office said. All right, let's start with figuring out. You people are funny. I'm looking at the comments because I can see them. We don't see your nose hairs today. Yes, the camera is far away now because I figured I can get away with it now that I've resolved that little audio setting. You people are a trip. All right, so the first thing we need to figure out is what is the senior assassin? Because my wife sent me the story. She was like, hey, I was with the mom group and we were talking about it. You know, here's the story. And I was like, it's interesting. I've never heard of this senior assassin game. Turns out it's a relatively new game in terms of us olds. So here I'm reading from Wikipedia. I know we don't like Wikipedia, but again, for a good summary, it works. And this is just a silly game, so Wikipedia probably got it right. Usually it's when you start getting into some controversial topics when we start having questions about the authenticity of the information. Anyway, so it says, Senior Assassin is a form of the assassin game often played in the United States between students in 12th grade during their senior year before graduation. I've never heard of this. I was a senior in like 1997. There was no senior assassin. We had skip days. Okay, that's what we did. So I guess now they just stay in school and they play assassin games. I don't know. It's kind of whatever. The objective of the game is for participating students to, quote, assassinate or eliminate their target, a fellow participating student, by squirting them with a water gun within a given time period. While rules often vary by school, most games are played bracket style, with the winner of the game receiving a jackpot prize of all limited players' entry fees. Games are not sanctioned by the school, are not allowed to take place on private property or school grounds. Despite these precautions, the game has been condemned by some authorities for reasons often revolving around student safety and those unfamiliar with the game, resulting in prior incidents. So basically, here's what this game is. Let's say you have 5 students. They all get together like, we're going to play this senior assassin game. And so they all put in money. And so it's, from what I'm reading, it looks like it's a winner take all, right? And so then they have to try to assassinate each other. And there's a certain time frame. And they use water guns, and then they use their camera to like take photos of this. So my wife sent it to me and I was like, well, this, and so I immediately sent her a picture back. I went to Facebook and I pulled up this picture that I'd sent that I posted like back in 2021 when my son was like 2 years old. And I showed him clearing, in quotations there, clearing a water gun in a barrel before he took the water gun in the house. So what I've always done is said, like, look, you can have a water gun. He now has a cap gun. We have some rules around how he has these guns, like how he operates and uses them. Like, hey, you know, don't shoot anybody in the face, you know, and the rules are appropriate. They're age appropriate, and they're appropriate based on the device he's using. Like, I can't say with the water gun, don't ever point it at somebody, because that wouldn't make any sense, right? Like, it's a water gun. Like, that's the whole point of it. You shoot somebody with it. So I just kind of put some ground rules that make sense based on the object, that, you know, the type of gun that he's got. When we got to the cap gun, I was like, you know, don't shoot it in the house. Don't point it at people, you know, point it at objects, stuff like that. So we changed the rules up, because a cap gun doesn't necessarily need to be pointed at a person. Now, if he's out with his buddies and, you know, his little friends, and they're shooting each other with it, I'm not going to squawk about it. I'm not going to make a big deal of it. All I'm trying to do is just kind of incrementally teach him gun safety as he goes along, so that when he gets older and he starts getting into things that actually project objects, BB guns, so on and so forth, he's already got a foundation, you know, of gun safety. And my wife was like, well, yeah, but that doesn't seem to be sufficient here. And I was like, you're right. It's a package deal. There are other things that are involved. So, for instance, showing up at somebody's house at 6 a.m. With a darker water gun, so like not one that's like bright green and bright yellow and stuff like that, right? Like this, and you can't see the picture, but the picture in the, if you were to go look it up, they have a picture of the water gun, and it's like It's got black and kind of like a darker blue. So at 6 in the morning, it doesn't probably look like a water gun. So anyway, so I was like, yeah, there's a number of things that need to be at play here. And so like you should not be at somebody's house unannounced at 6 in the morning wearing a ski mask with a water gun that could be easily mistaken for a real firearm, right? Like that is another conversation. It's also a bad idea. So that's that story. So now let me shift gears and let me tell you about this podcast episode, a snippet of it from yesterday that I was listening to. This comes from Dave Smith, part of the problem. And in that episode, he's going over a couple of things. He's talking about the issue of the constitutional crisis, but toward the end, he kind of changes the topic a little bit, and he says, all right, let's talk about the Libertarian Party. And he's like, he's pointing out that during COVID, the Libertarian Party was not so good about standing tall against tyranny. And he's talking about how him and others, who are members of the party, but, different people, like they were not, like we're talking about like the Mises Caucus and other folks who were like, hey, this is wrong. This is tyrannical. You can't lock people down. Hey, there's questions about this vaccine. Are we really being told the truth on many levels? And so he's talking, he's like, look, they didn't stand tall. So fast forward now, when all this information's out that basically rebukes things that happened, they can't go back and say, hey, look who was standing tall during that time. And, he's kind of pointing out this issue, and he kind of dovetails this this episode from Joe Rogan, where Joe Rogan was talking about the new vice chair for the Democratic Party, and that's David Hogg. Now, we all know David Hogg. He's that young 20-ish, somewhere in his 20s, early 20s, 20-year-old guy who was part of the Parkland. He attended Parkland High School during the time that they had the Parkland shooting. And that's he rose to prominence because of just, being outspoken and whatnot. And Joe Rogan is like, look, this guy isn't very masculine. And the Democratic Party has a problem. Like they admit that they were not successful at getting the male vote. And I've talked about this in the past on some of my shows. I'm like, look, like you guys went and badgered men. You just basically tried to shame them into voting. Of course, they're not going to vote for you. And so now they've brought in this more effeminate man. I don't know the chair. I don't know much about him, but I can tell you a little bit about David Hogg. So they brought in this more effeminate guy, and they're like, this is going to be our leader. This is going to be who we get, who we have bring back the male vote. And Joe Rogan's like, yeah, no man's going to follow this guy. Like, or maybe men in droves, like large numbers of men are not going to follow this guy. You're going to get some men. There's always somebody. There's like 8 billion people on the planet. Somebody will always follow somebody. So now the question is, okay, like, what do these two topics have to do with each other? Well, again, during COVID, many people, myself included, we stood tall. We opposed the lockdowns. We questioned the narrative. We challenged authority on some occasions, right? And the LP didn't do that. And then we see the story where, a young teenage, an 18-year-old gets shot prowling around doing something innocent, right? Like he wasn't doing anything wrong per se. I mean, he was in the wrong, but he wasn't like, he wasn't like being violent. He wasn't threatening somebody. He was playing. He was trying to have fun, okay? As 18-year-olds do. Like I remember before I was even 18, I was like 15. My friend and I, we would play Rambo, and he would like I lived at a house, and we had a house owned the extra lot next to it. So there was like, imagine like 2 houses, but there's only one house, 2 properties, and one house on a property, and then the other property is completely empty. And so imagine that we owned both of those because we did, and so we would play on this big plot of land, and he would sit on one side of it, and I would try to run across as he would try to shoot me with a BB gun, right? Like, this is what boys do. Boys do this kind of like dangerous stuff. You know, they're finding their way in the world. And so what do these two stories have to do with each other? Well, I think the merger of these two stories is a story about masculinity is in short supply in the United States. It's affecting our workplaces. It's affecting our families. Think about all the broken homes that you have out there. It's affecting our children. Remember the episode where I was defending voting for Chase, and I started talking about the number of children that are being prescribed SSRIs and ADHD medication, and now the more popular thing, or it was at least, not now, but it was just literally months ago, popular to give your child like hormone therapy and to give them puberty blockers, like all these medications. And so then you've got it's affecting our education. Like, this short supply of masculinity is impacting our entire society. So let me give you a quick story about education, for example, just because I want to illustrate the difference between, so you can see, you can compare a time when masculinity existed in force, if you will, and now. So there's a book called Up From Slavery, written by Booker T. Washington. I reference it all the time. It's a really great book. It's a phenomenal read. If you have not read it, I encourage you to make time to read it. So Booker T. Washington was born into slavery, and then he was old enough to have been born into slavery and then also freed. And he talks about educating his fellow black people, black folk. How do you say it? How would you say it so it doesn't sound so like weird? I'm just going to say it. He was educating his fellow Black Americans because they were now Americans, maybe not to the fullest like they should have been, but they were. And the problem was they had no capital. They had no political capital. They had no social capital. They didn't even have regular capital, like money, like that was limited. And so but people wanted to learn how to read. They wanted to get educated. So what Booker T. Washington did, he was like, we're going to build a school. And he said, all right, if you want to be a student in this school, you come here and you help us build the school. The problem was they didn't have money, so they couldn't buy bricks so that they could actually build the walls. So what they have to do? They made their own bricks. Well, guess what? They didn't have money, so they couldn't buy a kiln, so they had to make their own kiln. And so they used whatever limited funds they had to start buying the most basic materials to build a kiln. And I believe it failed like the first 3 times. And they were getting desperate. And so he had a watch, a relatively nice watch. And he sold it. I believe it was a watch. And he sold it to get a little bit extra money. He was like, all right, we're gonna do this one last time. This is we've got to get this right. So they built this 4th kiln, and finally it worked. So they were able to build bricks. And then as they went along, they started getting good at building bricks. And they got so good that white people were like, we'd like to buy some of your bricks. So I want you to imagine this. You want to go to school, you want to become educated. And you're told, yeah, you can totally come to school. You got to walk however far it is to get here. Once you do, you have to help us build this school. So we're going to be working all day. Basically, you're coming here and you're going to have a full-time job. I think if I remember correctly, they gave credits toward the school. He said, okay, you'll get credits to go toward the school. Well, it's not a lot, but you'll get credits. And then in the evening, once we're done working, then only then can we work on the education. And then we're going to do it all over again tomorrow. So imagine that, right? And so they were able to not only build their school, become educated, educate others, but also they were able to sell their bricks. This is phenomenal. I mean, and you can argue and say, well, they shouldn't have had to. Yeah, sure. That's what they had to work with. And they made the best out of so little. It was amazing. Okay. And this is the kind of thing that I believe masculinity, proper, true masculinity delivers. Because I think what we have right now in society is this distorted view of what masculinity even is. This is why I reject the idea of toxic masculinity. I'm just like, look, it doesn't exist. There are toxic behaviors. Masculinity and femininity are not toxic. We may distort them. We may hyper focus on certain elements to the exclusion of other ones that would counterbalance. But in itself, neither of those two are toxic. That's, they are in fact complementary. I believe that they go together. So let's focus on some of the some of those elements of masculinity: toughness, strength, competitiveness, stoicism, meaning emotional restraint. That one's one that gets butchered all the time, like don't cry. Never let them see you sweat. Yeah, I mean, there's a time and a place for that, right? But that's one of the things about masculinity that gets distorted badly, right? It goes too far. But here are some things that we often don't think about, and I think this is why when we talk about masculinity, a lot of people kind of have this idea that, oh yeah, maybe it is toxic. Independence, courage, protectiveness, self-discipline, logical thinking. Now you might be saying, maybe you're a woman listening in. Maybe you're a liberty lady, perhaps. And you're like, well, I have some of those traits. You probably do, because these are actually human traits. Now we find them in certain degrees in men and different degrees in women. And that's why I think that they counterbalance. And there's more. I mean, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a few things that I wrote down for the show. And so I look at it and I say, think more like Maximus from Gladiator, not Andrew Tate. Now, just think about those two comparisons. Like and you've probably seen the movie Gladiator, it's like from what, 2000 or something. It's a very old movie. And in the movie Gladiator, you have Maximus, who is like the leader of the Roman Legion. And he gets screwed because of some power-hungry son that the drawing a blank. I was going to say king, not king. The Caesar. He wanted the power, and his father was like, "Yeah, no, I'm going to give it to Maximus, who's not even his son." And that just enrages the son, played by Joaquin Phoenix, I think is his name. And so he ends up killing his dad before his dad can give the throne, or if you will, give the leadership over to Maximus. And so because of that, it goes to the default. It's like because in those times it defaulted to the son. Well, since he was the son, he now is in charge. And so then he exiles. He actually doesn't exile. He tries to have Maximus murdered. It doesn't work. In the meantime, while that's playing out, he actually sends the centurions over to kill Maximus's wife and son, and he murders them. So then Maximus goes and he gets free after they tried to kill him, and it doesn't work. And he goes and he finds that his family's been murdered, and then he ends up getting captured and sold into slavery, basically, and he becomes a gladiator, and then he basically fights his way to the point where the crowds love him, and then it's eventually discovered that, oh, this is who he is. And so now this new Caesar, this new emperor, I think that's really the word I was looking for, the new emperor, the son that tried to have him killed, that killed his father, he ended up having to fight him, and then they both die at the end. So what is masculine about all that? Well, during the movie, you can see moments where he really did want to kill the emperor, but it wasn't the right time. He took his time. He was like, look, if I do it now, none of this works, right? Like, I'm just going to be imprisoned or whatever, or I'll be killed, and I don't really get my vengeance. And so he bides his time on purpose, and he maintains patience. He maintains his cool. There were even moments where the emperor challenged him, but had he attacked him, it would have looked simply like an attack. And so what he ended up doing is he gets the crowd, he gets the audience on his side. Once the audience is on his side, and then once the emperor says, I will fight you, well, now he's in a position to kill the emperor and look good, right? Like he restores, in the movie, of course, he restores, things the way they should be by removing this tyrant. So what does that have to do with the political party? Well, I think that I think Dave Smith, when he was talking, he was like, look, the political party, the Libertarian Party in specific, they need to stand tall and not waver. They need to be prepared to take a lot of heat. And he points out, when the Ukraine war started, a lot of people who are anti-war, myself and others, we got a lot of flack. People were like, oh, you're just, you're Russians, you're traitors, you hate Ukrainians, all this, Ukrainians, not Ukrainians, all these terrible things. We had a lot of names leveled at us, and it was not a position that was palatable to take, but it was a position that many of us took, and it was the right position. The same way that it was the right position to oppose lockdowns. When I look back at my tweets and the videos that I made during COVID, I'm very, very proud of them. And why? Not because I was right, though partially. I'm proud of them because when I look back and I see, why did I make that decision? I realize I made good decisions. That's part of masculinity too. Learning to make good decisions, knowing when the time is right to let your yes be yes and your no be no. Maximus showed that in the movie. He illustrates it several times. Another movie, The Patriot, which I cannot remember his name, William something, I think. He does the same thing, right? This is during the war with the British. One of the commanders for the British ends up killing his son. He doesn't do anything. He even taunts him throughout the movie. He still doesn't do anything. Toward the end, he gets his opportunity to kill the guy, right? He exercised restraint. He exercised proper thinking, not allowing his emotions to overtake him, right? And this is what it means to be masculine, is knowing when to do something, when to act, when not to act. And when it's time to act, standing tall. So now let's go back to this original story, right? The one about the shooting with the 18-year-old boy. How does all of this play into that? When you have a society that has proper masculinity embedded in it, running through its veins, what you'll find is that us olds, as I like to say, people like me who are like 46, have experienced life, have done dumb things. I joked with my wife. I was like, because she was really concerned. She's like, well, I don't ever want to get a call like that about my son. I was like, I agree. I said, you should probably never let me tell you some of the stories of things that I did about that age, because they were really dumb. When we have a proper masculine society, we can tell our young men who are out there looking to cross that threshold from being a young man to being an adult man, from being a boy to becoming a man. We can tell them, no, that's not how you do it. No, don't do that. Yes, do that. In this particular situation, the problem isn't that they were playing some assassination game necessarily. That's not the issue. It's okay to have fun and shoot water guns at your friends. But if it was my son and he was like, yeah, Dad, this is what we're doing, like the same rules would apply that I'm slowly teaching. Do not show up at somebody's house unannounced, wearing a ski mask with something that looks like a firearm, at 6 a.m. That is practically begging to get shot. That is a very unwise idea. Now, if you want to play an assassination game with your friends, that's cool. Like, I have no issue with that. That's fine. Like we should encourage our young people to exercise their imagination. Is he really an assassin? No. Do I want my son becoming a real live assassin? Absolutely not. Is it fun to play an assassin, with your friends? Sure. Video games or in real life, like with water guns or laser guns or what have you. Like, oh, that's fun and that's good. But there are ways to do it to minimize your risk, and there are ways to do it that maximize your risk. And I believe that what we need in our society is men to stand up and exercise the range of traits that are associated with masculinity and exercise them in the proper way. You cannot, it's no more healthy to tell a man never to cry than it is to tell him go sleep with a bunch of women and drink tons and tons of booze. Those things don't make you a man. Knowing when to engage in either, knowing when to cry and when not to cry, knowing when to have, intimacy with a woman and when not to, knowing when, what was the other one? What did I say? I lost. I had like nice little string going. But knowing when to engage in these different things and how, that's what makes you a man. That's what makes you masculine. Oh, drinking, that was the other one. Knowing when to have a glass of whiskey with your buddies and when to say, I'm done. That's being masculine, right? One final story, because I thought of it and it relates to drinking. And what I want to do is I want to tackle some of these perceptions of what masculinity is. I had a friend, I think I've told this story before. When I was in my 30s, I was hanging out with some friends and I went to a bar with them. And I wasn't really into liquor drinks too much, but I stopped drinking beer because it just didn't sit well with me. And so I was like, yeah, I think I like vodka, but I didn't really know too many vodka drinks. So I asked the bartender, I said, or the waitress, I said, can you recommend me a drink? She's like, yeah, I'll recommend you a drink. I said, okay, cool. So she brings out a cranberry vodka, and I'm getting it right up to my lips to drink. And my buddy says, dude, are you on your period? And I said, say what? And he was like, are you on your period? And I was like, what are you talking about? And so turns out that wasn't at that time with that crowd a masculine drink. So I politely called the waitress over and I was like, hey, you get me in trouble with my friends. Can I get a different drink? She laughed. She got me something else. And we went on about our way. Cool beans. So later, one of my friends was telling me when he was in college, he said, you can be the kind of man that bows to your friends, or you can be the kind of man like I knew in college. He just drank whatever he liked and he didn't care. If it was a girly drink, he drank it anyway. He didn't care. And I was like, yeah, you're right, man. Like, why am I letting my friends dictate what I drink? That's just crazy, right? And it's unfortunate. Now, my dad didn't drink when I was growing up, so that's perhaps one of the reasons why I didn't get that particular lesson. But it was just like, it didn't occur to me that, hey, part of being a man is making your decisions and living by the outcome. You might, not living entirely. You might get a bad outcome and say, okay, I got to fix this. But, dealing with the consequences and accepting the consequences. And perhaps in some cases, many cases, knowing what the consequences are and being prepared to face them. When it came to COVID, I knew that the consequences could potentially be serious. When they were talking about, mandatory vaccines, and I was like, you're not going to mandatory anything in this body, I was prepared to be fired. And so I was already making plans and said, all right, this might happen. I don't know. Right. But I understood what the consequences might be. This is what we need in society. We need more of this. Now, when it comes to more effeminate men, there are effeminate men that I believe still can be considered masculine. And when I say effeminate men, I mean more like they have a more effeminate voice. Maybe they're more calm, right? Like that kind of, effeminate, they're not husky and burly and just like, raw. They're just more soft-spoken. Because I've known men who are soft-spoken, who I would say that's every bit a man, right? But I don't believe that David Hogg is that guy. I think he needs a few lessons yet to say this is how you properly engage and exercise the range of masculinity. And I think people can see it. I think when you meet a man, it's like the old handshake. People will say if you shake a man's hand, like men will say, if you shake a man's hand and he's kind of like, just kind of, let's see if I can get up to the camera, and he's just kind of like barely holding your hand. It's like, no, that's what I would expect a woman to do. Grab the man's hand. You don't have to squeeze the snot out of it, right? But you give him a nice, good, firm handshake. And that's how you know you're dealing with another man. That's one of the signals, one of the cues. Hey, this is a man right here, right? Now, that doesn't mean that he's necessarily a good man and he's exercising all the other traits properly. That's just one small element. That's what our society is missing. And that's what our political party is missing. I would say many of the political, probably all of the political parties, but I'll focus on the Libertarian Party. We need masculinity. We need it now. And we need it to exercise within the range of traits that are associated and understood to be part of masculinity in the ways that make them masculine. Because again, all those traits, women have them too, but they exercise them in a different way. And that's useful, that's necessary. That's what makes femininity. We need both. And I believe we have an over-feminized society, and we need to bring masculinity back. All right, folks, that's my show. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to get up out of here and see you guys tomorrow. So have a good one.